Hello everyone. I recorded this yesterday, but the audio fucked up. Um, so I'm here doing it again. But sounds like I wrote stuff down. It's just because I know exactly what I'm gonna say or what I have to say. Um, Little background, I guess. To be fair, uh, this video was made a year ago. This is Vaush's Politics 102 video. He goes over tons of different uh, terms you'd find in a political lexicon, and his view on them, his definition of them. Um, Again, we're being good faith, so it's possible that Vaush's Vaush's view has evolved since last year, and maybe he's come to see fascism as a developmental dictatorship, um, like the rest of us. But yeah, I don't think I have anything else to really preface with.
Fascism is a little bit difficult to describe for me personally because the definition that I am most familiar with and the one that I enjoy the most is from Umberto Eco. This is a definition that anybody who's watched my stream for any length of time is probably familiar with. It is a compilation of 14 points that he says describe Ur-fascism. Now, I could go over all of these and it would take a little while, but I'm going to say this generally, okay? This is sort of a general statement that I'm going to make for the purpose of being concise, okay? When I think of fascism, I don't think of governments. I think of social trends in broader communities, warning signs that you find, an indication that a community or a movement is leaning in a fascistic direction. Okay? Does that make sense? So,
Um, there's a few things. I guess I won't mention Echo now because we'll go point by point, or he'll go point by point soon. But just to provide a little background on where this kind of approach comes from. To clarify, I think it's fine to analyze political philosophies uh, behaviorally and psychologically, yeah, or rather, political realities that purport to manifest certain political philosophies. So I think it's fine to write about the psychology of leftism or the psychology of, like Ted Kaczynski does in Industrial Revolution. Um, I think that's fine, but it needs to succeed a a mapping of the ideas, because without understanding what it actually is, you're going to be lost in determining what the behaviors and psychology of it is. And so this is the main problem with Vaush, from what I can tell, in terms of his approach to fascism. When you ask, like, where does this come from? Well, there was this view of fascism as lacking doctrine, as lacking an ideological basis. Partly because during the rise of fascism in the 20th centuries, which in Italy, the Italian Marxists had to explain, like, how does this happen, because it didn't coincide with their prediction of the real movement of history, and so they dismissed fascists as fundamentally irrational for denying the reality of communism, the inevitability of communism, and so fascism was seen as fundamentally irrational, as idolizing the irrational man. But of course, this is not. You can't find this anywhere in fascist thought. The other thing that you may be able to get this from is the anti-intellectualism of fascism, but we'll get to that in a second.
think of it a little bit like a diagnosis of a mental illness, which is a very apt comparison. Okay? When you're diagnosing a mental illness, you can't just, for the most part, a doctor can't just like hear like 2 lines from their patient and check it off and go like, oh yeah, that's that. It's usually more complicated. You have to dig into the thoughts and the patterns and the behaviors and the beliefs of the person you're talking to really understand the diagnosis. So when it comes to fascism, okay, here are some broader trends to look out for, okay? Think of it as political advocacy defined by some of these ideas. And I'm just going to list it off, okay? A worship of tradition and a rejection of modernism, i.e. we must return to the past. Modern society is degenerate. It is corrupting us. We need to return to the old ways.
It's ironic that a communist, a socialist, does Vaush consider himself an advocate for an eventually communist society. I don't know. He's a Marxist, right? So, or calls himself one. Anyways, so this one is kind of true in the sense that fascism does tend to. I mean, it depends. So, part of the problem with people's conceptions of fascism is that they don't understand that fascism is, or purports to be, a movement which emerges from the spirit of that people. And so it's going to differ by culture, by society. The German National Socialists saw themselves as invaded by Jews, and that dichotomy between the German and the Jew resulted from that. Now, you could say that was unfounded or unjustified, or their answer to that problem was awful, which obviously I would agree with that. But it's a product of their time, of where they were, who they were, and when they were. Same thing with fascist Italy. Talk about the heroic capitalist era in fascist Italy, where they freed up markets to industrialize. Because, I don't know, it's ironic because Marxists talk about fascism being capitalism in decay, but when Italy became fascist, or when fascism was rising in Italy, it was barely even capitalist. It was mostly agrarian and pre-industrialist. The fascists actually had to industrialize. I think it was in the 20s, early 20s. But yeah, so it is true that there is this, there does tend to be, wherever fascism arises, a rhetoric regarding past cultures and traditions of one's people, like in Origins and Doctrines of Fascism, Gentile talks about the Risorgimento and returning to that kind of nationalistic spirit. But it also looks forward. I mean, Marinetti was one of the founders of fascism in Italy. Very influential in the movement. Obviously, they had a tough relationship, a tough history, but to say that there's no, or to suggest, not that Vaush did this directly, but people tend to take it as, suggest that fascism merely looks at the past, would be mistaken. The idea of the third way is it's neither left nor right, it's forward. That's the idea, right? But yeah.
A promotion of action and advocacy over thought. Don't engage in introspection. Act. Fight. Fight for what is yours.
So this is the anti-intellectualism part. When fascists say anti-intellectualism or anti-intellectual, they're referring to thought devoid of action, not thought in and of itself. I mean, fascism had ideological founders. It has people who mapped out what the ideas are. They had the thought. It's often seen that Gentile, the philosopher of fascism, was the thought, and Mussolini was his action. And so there's this symbiotic relationship proposed by fascism between these two terms. So this is ahistorical and baseless, this idea that fascism is anti-intellectual. And of course that's, again, another feature that plays into this idea that fascism is fundamentally irrational and therefore devoid of ideological convictions, and we can't analyze it through philosophical means. We can't talk about nationalism, we can't talk about the totalitarian state, we can't talk about preserving a nation, we can't talk about fascist view on unity, we can't talk about any of that stuff, because we don't know that it exists, because we think fascism is just, I don't know, he mentions this like a cultural pathogen of just irrational violence that's right wing or whatever. And that's essentially what this approach leads to.
Don't think about it. Thinking is emasculating. An obsession with right think and wrong think. If you disagree, this isn't just an intellectual exercise, it's treason. Disagreeing in a fascist society, or with fascists, means that you are an enemy to the people with whom you disagree. Think, by the way, of the language used in the...
Again, I mean, this is true to an extent if you are, if you're a media organization pushing uh, 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 lies against the state, then yeah, you're a traitor to the state and to your people. That, I guess. I don't. This isn't a critique, really. But he's trying to like do this like Chad is all spamming 1984, but like, can you give historical examples or explain why it follows from the doctrine of fascism that this is going to manifest politically in fascist movements or regimes? He can't, and he doesn't, and he never does in this video. I think he mentions Germany once in this video, and how the hyperinflation allowed Hitler to gain power. I think it's the only time he mentions historical fascism.
Fundraising emails the Trump campaign continues to send out. Hey,
Like it's Trump, it's George Bush, it's Antonin Scalia. There's no understanding of fascist history.
I notice you haven't donated in 90 days. If you don't donate soon, I'm going to be forced to tell our team that you've joined the no-good commie Democrats. I'm actually quoting. I'm pretty sure I'm like quoting word for word their fundraiser emails here. If you don't side with us, you're the enemy. That's a big one for fascism. A fear of difference is a key one as well, which appeals to the same thing. An appeal to social frustration.
I don't know where this is from either. It's ironic because the entirety of the fascist project is predicated on difference. If there was no difference, then the fascist project would be useless. It would be futile, according to fascism, because fascists predicate their entire social philosophy on unification. Gentile says that the highest social value is unifying with other and all that is other. And of course, for this to be the case, there needs to be different things. Both identity, unity, and difference are all codependent terms. There is no unity without difference. I can't unify with you unless you are distinct from me. If not, there would be no unification. That's what's implied in unification. Same thing with identity. I am not me if I'm not all that is not. If I'm not all that is not me. So identity in difference, unity in difference. These are very common in like post-German idealist thought, of which Giovanni Gentile was a major part of, especially in Italy. He was the guy in Italy. So yeah, this is not true.
That's a big one too. You have to take this latent feeling that something is wrong. Often it's economic frustration. That happened here in America today among Trump voters. It happened in the Weimar Republic and the mega inflation they experienced after World War I.
Hey, you! Me? Yeah, you! Don't you want to play something different?
But it's also social frustration. One of the social frustrations that fascists in America appeal to the most is the fear that white straight men are having...
Everybody appeals to political and social and economic frustration. That's politics. What, you think liberalism doesn't do that? I mean, I'm sure you say, I'm not a liberal, but like, this is just politics.
Their rights removed.
Also, do people say that white people are getting their rights removed, or just that they're oppressed? Those are not the same thing. Well, you should know this with Vaush as an understander of systemic racism. Those aren't the same thing. Maybe there are people that say white people are getting their rights removed. I would disagree with that. At least tentatively. I don't know what they're referring to. I don't believe in rights in that way anyways, so I don't care. I care about oppression of whites or the lack of ability to advocate for white interests. I don't even care that much about that. But it is the case that white people are the only racial group that are not allowed to advocate for their interests, or ethnic group, if you want to say. I think it's possible to conceive of white America as a pan-European like ethnic group. Anyways, yeah, this is I don't know.
You see that a lot? Now people are being anti-white. Now people are being anti-men. Now people are being anti-straight. You all these things. These are the last.
Is that wrong? I mean, even if you want to say it's still not the dominant. It's not dominant. It is the. What social capital are you risking when you tweet about hating white people? Not that much. What social capital are you risking if you tweet about hating black people? Now, you could say that's justified. You could say the history of the United States and the dynamics therein justify that. We could talk about that, but to claim it's not true is just dishonest.
Groups you can attack these days, you know? Or the only groups that you can attack still. It's, you know, that sort of thing. A social frustration. Okay? We're almost done now. An obsession with a plot. There's always a story. Some enemy trying to destroy us. And that enemy is both strong and weak. Depending on the rhetorical framing, that enemy can be weak, cowardly, effeminate, easy to destroy, or overwhelming and unstoppable. Think of how conservatives talk about Antifa. What is Antifa? Is it a group?
They're fascists. It's interesting because it's interesting to give this example because when you hear conservatives call Antifa fascist, it's because of the approach that was dominant in fascist scholarship that produced this kind of attitude in pop culture and society, which Vaush is obviously giving into. This idea that fascism is just irrational political violence or whatever. Conservatives can say that Antifa is fascist and get tons of upvotes on Twitter exactly because of this approach to fascist scholarship.
Of thin-necked 19-year-old soy boys who turn over trash cans? Or is it a group of...
Also, conservatives aren't fascists, so I don't... like, again, notice, he can only bring up, like, contemporary examples.
Militant agitators who travel from protest to protest as part of a nefarious plot to destroy America? Well, depending on when you ask them, they're going to say it's either or the other. To wrap it up, keep an eye out for anti-pacifism, the idea that you are a traitor if you do not wish to engage in violence. You saw this during the January 6th Capitol riots, remember? Republican officials who were...
Yeah, fascism is not pacifist. Certainly. Fascism is not afraid of violence. It is not pro-violence, but it is not afraid of violence, especially for revolution, if it ever gets to that point. But don't you agree, Vaush? Do you you advocate for violence for your socialist revolution? Either you're LARPing or you don't actually believe in this critique of fascism or care for it. Yeah.
Were not publicly backing the attack on the Capitol were called traitors, and they called for their hanging. Everyone is educated to become a hero. This one is a little bit more esoteric, but think of it like this. Heroism is incredibly important to the fascist because the fascist is an authoritarian, usually highly deferential to the state. A hero in the fascist context is a person willing to die for that state, or for the race, or for the vote, or for the people, or whatever.
This one's fine. This one is essentially true. Yeah, fascism has this idea of the new ideal man, a man unified with national interests, living a spiritual life and not a hedonistic or materialistic one, unifying itself with the collective and not pursuing mere individual interests and material pleasures. This is true. Brazilian integralists use the term internal revolution, which I like. I think they got it from some anarchist or leftist, actually. Maybe Sorel, I don't know. I don't remember. But yeah, this is mostly true. I mean, and yeah, if it comes to it, the idea is you would sacrifice yourself for the nation for fascism. But would you not sacrifice yourself for socialism? You wouldn't sacrifice yourself for the proletarian revolution, Vaush? If not, fine, but like I feel like most people wouldn't think of that as awful.
The hero is a person willing to get...
I mean, dying for your country is praise in America. This is not like controversial in politics.
Do you know how many 15, 16, 17-year-old German boys died on the front lines when the Nazis ran out of adult soldiers? Quite a few.
I mean, look at chat. They always think there's some kind of hero. By Antifa Admiral. Like, you don't see yourself as some anti-capitalist, anti-fascist revolutionary. What fascists are you against? Are you fighting, by the way? Antifa Admiral.
We're told, since they were old enough to understand, since they were old enough to hear German, that one day they might be called upon to die in service of the country, and that it was their responsibility, and that they would die a hero. The cult of heroism is a big, big component of fascism, as is an obsession with machismo and weaponry. I think that speaks to itself.
No, it doesn't, but okay.
populism, that is to say, right populism. Yeah, we need to gang up on the elites. And by we, I mean the white, straight, cisgender working class who votes Republican. You know? We are anti-elite, except I mean a very small...
What is... You don't have to be white to be a fascist. You don't have to be straight or cis. There are trans fascists. There's on YouTube, actually, a re-upload of Culture Thug, the fascist, the Nazi, National Socialist. It's probably not right to call him a Nazi, but the National Socialist, who who got a question by one of his fans. Somebody that worked on him helped translate something that he needed for a video. It was trans or something, and they were a fascist. It's a pretty wholesome Q&A. But yeah, you don't have to be a trans or cis to be a fascist. I'd imagine most fascists think transgenderism is a mental illness, not something to be faulted for, at least inherently. That's silly. Same with homosexuality, and race. Obviously, I mean, there are. It's possible for a fascist movement to organize around race. Most American fascists I know of think that is silly. Most white nationalists are not fascists. They don't care about third position. They don't care about corporatism or totalitarianism or spiritualism. They're not real fascists. The idea that a fascist America would be pro-white or explicitly pro-white, exclusively white, is a pipe dream and laughable. I guess I'll make videos at some point going over my views on race and where I differ from the rest of the dissident right and where I don't differ from the rest of the dissident right. But yeah, do you not do the same? You don't this is just populism. Organizing against the elites, that's just populism. So this isn't a critique. Yeah, I mean, we can look at historical examples too, which Vaush refuses to do because he doesn't know them. The Brazilian integralists, for example, explicitly organized around a multiracial society. Their slogan was a nation for all people or something like that. Union of all races and all peoples. Yeah, it's just silly. Fascist doctrine is explicitly anti-materialist. Any biological conception or purely biological conception of race. I'm not saying that fascists haven't been racist in the past, but insofar as they are racist, they are violating some of their implicit ideas. I mean, you have to be an idealist. We are reorienting society towards the spiritual. So to care about something so crudely biological like race, intrinsically, to care about it intrinsically, to care about it pragmatically is one thing. Like black people caring about race in society nowadays, in American society, it's like, well, it was forced upon them. So, but like this intrinsic care for race, this is not fascist.
Fragment of the population, proportional to the majority against the elites. And the last one is newspeak, and this is a big one. Remember the alternative facts meme? Fascism demands its advocates invent new terms whose job it is to obfuscate the meaning of the ideas being expressed. This is a fairly common one for authoritarian governments in general. It's played up in 1984, which is why newspeak is the term being used here by Umberto Eco. You take terms that are sinister and you recode them, smash them down, chop off ends of words and mix them together into some sort of Frankenstein until you have a...
Okay, now, like I said, I watched this video before last night, but you think Vaush is going to provide a historical example of this occurring in fascism, in fascist movements or fascist regimes, or is he going to provide a contemporary example that is laughable? Let's see.
Completely new lexicon. Have you ever taken a look at a far right like pro-Trump board, like the Donald back before it got new?
The Donald.
Oh my god.
The pinnacle of National Socialist ideology, the Donald. Yeah, this is just a joke.
God, these people were barely speaking English. Okay, They were barely speaking English. They were looking through it. The jargon that they used was just, and there was a purpose to it as well. Is it because they're cowards?
Like, look at this. To be fair, Vaush at the end clarifies that against this kind of approach, TERFs are 100% fascist. In my opinion, they do this all the time. Now, obviously, we're being good faith. Vaush doesn't think that, you know, if one of these applies to you, then you're a fascist, or that's enough for us to identify you as a fascist. So this person isn't representative of what Vaush is saying, but this is what this approach results in when it gets when this message gets degraded and chopped up for the masses. Again, yeah, that's not a critique of Vaush, though. So.
Or what? It's a part of cult-like behavior. If you get people who are part of an extremist crowd to speak a unique language, it becomes easier for them to speak with the in-crowd and harder for them to speak to people outside of that crowd. They begin to use terms and express ideas insular that are less and less understandable to the average person, until eventually their social circle is comprised almost exclusively of people who agree with them politically. Like this chat does. You could argue that Twitch memes and like Twitch emote speak is a kind of newspeak, but it's not a...
I think he's talking about your community, not Twitch chats. We're talking about, like, online left communities. Like, if you show your average working class proletarian some like trans person's explication of their, you know, like retard gender identity or whatever, that's newspeak to them. Anything like any like terminally online left, like this happens there too. Like this is nothing to do with this is not what fascism is. It's nothing to do with fascism. Again, no historical examples, no explanation of why this follows from fascist doctrine.
A politically biased kind of newspeak. It's newspeak that is designed to accommodate the technological innovation, more so than it is newspeak designed to truncate thought and create insular social political community. Does that make sense? The reason why I spent so much time with this definition is because there's something that makes fascism unique. Most of the terms that we've described...
What makes it unique is you don't care to to look into it, to do your homework.
Today were described by academics. They were constructed as
not to say that Vaush does his homework in general.
a way of describing sets of ideas. Sometimes the words came about before the ideas were really even implemented. But in the case of fascism, I find it is most useful to think of it as a broad collection of social pathogens, types of behavior, sociological and psychological, that are destructive to human organized society.
Are there any ideological convictions, Vaush? No? Well, what about those philosophers that wrote about it before Italian fascism and Mussolini, who followed their doctrine up into the 40s, who, as he got more control of his state, was implementing more policies more in line with fascist doctrine? I wonder why that is.
Urge in certain conditions and tend to coexist. They develop and express themselves more effectively in tandem with one another, like a social pathogen, basically, a virus. So I know that sounds kind of larby, but I really do think that best explains the history of fascism. And if you look, by the way, at the history of fascism in this country and in others, then you'll find I think that's a fairly accurate example.
The history of fascism in this country, what, Lawrence Dennis? There's not that strong of a history of fascism in this country. And yeah, let's look at other countries, Vaush. Please give us an example. Please talk about fascist Italy, talk about Germany, talk about the Romanian Guard, talk about Brazilian. You won't and you can't because you just don't know. Again, not one historical example except that Weimar Germany's hyperinflation helped Hitler gain power. That is the only historical example he's provided.
Of how it emerges. It's not like neoliberalism. There is no neoliberal contagion that spreads from social movement to social movement with a bunch of vaguely interconnected ideas. And rhetorical styles that merge together. No, neoliberalism is a fairly understandable economic and political framework.
This blew me away when he said this. When I saw him say this yesterday. Yeah, I don't know what to say.
Right. Fascism is more complicated. So I use a broad definition. And if we're trying to determine whether or not something or someone is fascist, the best thing that you can do is look at their behavior, look at their language, and then try to find a way to see how well it matches onto these patterns. Almost.
Okay. Why are these patterns what fascism is? Please explain that. Explain why traditionalism as opposed to futurism is what describes fascism for you, Vaush. Explain why that's what follows from fascist doctrine. Explain how that's been the case in fascist societies. You haven't, and you can't.
Every person and every political group is going to adhere to at least a few of these terms because they're so broad. That's why you can't just think of it as like a checklist. You have to think of it like a set of warning signs. Have you ever seen those like those warning signs like if 10 or more of these apply to you?
Vaush, a lot of people find it disrespectful to the victims of the Holocaust to call Trump a fascist. It's funny for some reason. I'll do it, guys. I'll say it. Trump in 2016 ran on a fascist platform, or quasi-fascist, proto-fascist, close enough to where it awoke a lot of fascists to. I mean, it was a big white pill to genuine fascists, not retard LARPers. And looking back, yeah, he ran on a fascist platform. To say his regime was fascist is laughable, though.
You may have depression, and one of them is like sleeps in late. If you sleep in late, that does not mean you have depression inherently. That's not like a one-to-one thing, you know? But it can contribute to a broader self-understanding, you know? Do you find yourself lolling in and out of like coherence sometimes, like you're dissociating a little bit? That doesn't necessarily mean you're depressed, but it could mean it. And you have to look at these all together and think like, okay, how much does this describe me? How much does this describe us? That's how I like to think of fascism, in my opinion, personally. There are many other definitions of fascism, but I think the ones here probably lend the most utility in description. Oh, somebody mentioned...
It lends the most utility for you to call whoever you want a fascist. That's really what it is. I guess that's I'm implying motive, but it's either that or you're just so misinformed to the point where you shouldn't be talking about this, and the fact that you are is kind of dishonest, because how do you... I know the fact that I don't know about the LTV. I know that, so I'm not going to talk about it. But yeah, I think that's it for this video. I don't care to do the eco-fascism stuff. Is there anything else? Oh.
Really just an optics thing. Let's see. Socialism with Chinese characteristics, Vaush. What is it? In my opinion, if anyone ever uses the term socialism with blank characteristics, what they actually mean is not socialism. What they actually mean is, I like this country, so I can't say it's socialism because it's not. So it's socialism with X characteristics, which usually what actually means is that it's a social democracy with like very few hints of socialism, but they have a red flag. I don't think much of this term.
Kind of based. What they really mean is that it's national socialism. That's what they really mean. But yeah, he's right. Post-Tang China is not socialist. Not Marxist socialist, at least. I would argue that it's national socialist, but I'll make a whole long video on that at some point. Probably in like 2 months, because I need to read A Place in the Sun by Gregor before I do that. But yeah, I think that's it for this video. Yeah, Vaush, the Kang of socialist politics online. If you see this, I hope this provided some insight from a fascist on fascism. Yeah, see you guys.